If you want to run regional MMA events, local venues, 200 to 500 seats, fighters you found on ranking sites who are 6-4 and trying to get noticed, your startup costs are lower than you think, and your economics are worse than you know. To legally promote a combat sports event in California, you file with the California State Athletic Commission, pay a $1,000 professional promoter application fee, and post a surety bond of not less than $50,000. You also submit a notarized financial statement from a certified public accountant demonstrating you can cover purses, venue costs, taxes, insurance, and production. Nevada, New York, New Jersey, Texas, and Florida, every state where you want to run events, require their own separate applications. There is no national promoter license. You are buying one license per state, per regulatory body, with separate bonding requirements in each. Then the event itself. Venue rental at a local arena, $5,000 to $30,000, depending on market and capacity. Production, cage or ring rental, lights, sound, cameras, video crew, $20,000 to $50,000. Insurance, $10,000 to $20,000 per event. Referee and judge fees, ringside physician, sanctioning fees to whichever body is blessing your results. Another $5,000 to $10,000. Fighter purses for a 10-bout card at regional level, $80. Zeros into $200,000 total. You are spending $150,000 to $330,000 per event. Your gate at a 400-seat venue at $40 average ticket is $16,000. Local sponsor patches on the canvas add $5,000 to $20,000. You have a structural deficit of $100,000 to $300,000 every time you run a show. Research tracking hundreds of regional shows across North America found that 90% of regional promotions were fiscally insolvent. This is not a niche problem. This is the baseline business model at entry level. To run a regional promotion with enough runway to survive 3 years while building an audience, you need a minimum of $500,000 to $1 million in patient capital that you are prepared to lose. That's Tier 1. Tier 2 is the nationally recognizable promotion with a streaming or cable deal. A real roster, real rankings, something a mainstream platform would pay for. This is Combat Global territory, valued at $120 million on Forbes' 2024 Combat Sports Promotions list, with $18 million in annual revenue. To reach this organically takes approximately 5 years of burning $5 million to $15 million per year. To acquire an asset at this level costs $50 million to $150 million, and the asset is primarily the broadcast contract and the fighter roster, both of which can dissolve the moment the contract expires or the fighter's deals run out. Tier 3 is a major international promotion. Professional Fighters League, valued at $690 million with $110 million in 2023 revenue. Matchroom Boxing at $850 million. One Championship at $1.3 billion with $123 million in revenue. You don't start these, you acquire them. The most instructive recent transaction, in November 2023, the Professional Fighters League acquired Bellator MMA from Paramount Global for less than $100 million in PFL stock. No cash changed hands. Bellator had previously been valued as high as $500 million. Paramount received a minority stake in PFL and walked. PFL acquired 210 fighter contracts, the Bellator brand, and a production infrastructure. The price worked because Paramount no longer wanted to be in the combat sports business and took the first reasonable offer. Distressed sellers are the only mechanism for acquiring a Tier 3 asset without paying full market price. Tier 4 is the UFC. Purchased for $2 million in 2001 by Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta when it was failing, banned from cable television in most major markets, and dismissed by most of the sports industry as a legal and reputational liability. They sold it to Endeavor Group in 2016 for $4 billion. TKO Group Holdings, the public entity created when Endeavor merged the UFC and WWE in September 2023, carries the UFC at an enterprise value of $1 billion. Forbes 2024 combat sports valuations placed the UFC at $11.3 billion in standalone value with $1.29 billion in annual revenue. It is not for sale. Understanding its history is the only reason it belongs in this conversation. The regulatory path between you and a legal event looks like this. Every U.S. state that sanctions professional combat sports operates its own athletic commission. The Association of Boxing Commissions and Combative Sports attempts to harmonize standards nationally, but enforcement is local and inconsistent. To promote in the 6 markets that actually move revenue, California, Nevada, New York, New Jersey, Texas, Florida, you file separately in each one. Each requires its own application, financial documentation, surety bond, and approval. This is not a one-time process. You renew, you demonstrate financial fitness, you comply with each commission's specific event day requirements. The financial disclosure requirement eliminates most applicants before they ever reach a commission. You must demonstrate to a government body that you have sufficient capital to cover all anticipated expenses for events you have not yet run against revenues you cannot yet prove. If the documentation is insufficient, you do not receive approval. Timeline from initial application to first sanctioned event, 3 to 6 months minimum, assuming no revision requests and no complications with your bonding agent. In boxing, you also navigate the sanctioning bodies, the WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO, 4 private organizations that rank fighters, sanction world title fights, and charge fees for the privilege. Sanctioning fees on a world title fight can reach 2% to 3% of the purse value. On a $10 million fight, that's $200,000 to $300,000 paid to a private ranking organization. In MMA, the UFC controls its own rankings internally. That internal control is part of how it built $756 million in annual EBITDA. When you control who is ranked and who fights for what, you control the market. The business model looks complicated until you reduce it to one analogy. You are a television station. Your content happens to be people attempting to knock each other unconscious. The act of violence is not the product. The broadcast window into that act is the product. And like every television station, your financial survival depends entirely on whether a platform with distribution scale, a network, a streamer, a pay-per-view platform is willing to pay you for the right to carry your content. What that looks like at small scale: 500-seat regional event. Average ticket, $60. Gate, $30,000. Sponsors on the canvas, $8,000. A regional sports streaming app with 40,000 subscribers pays you $5,000 for broadcast rights to the card. Total revenue, $43,000. Total costs, $200,000. Net, negative $157,000. What that looks like at institutional scale: the UFC in 2023 generated $168 million in live event revenue. Gates and site fees from governments and venues that paid to host events in their markets. Sponsorship revenue hit a record $196 million, up 18% from the prior year. The ESPN media rights deal signed in 2019 was valued at $1. $5 billion over 5 years, approximately $300 million per year for broadcast access to the full UFC calendar of 43 annual events. The deal the UFC signed with Paramount, which takes effect in 2026, is valued at $7.7 billion over 7 years, $0.1 billion all per year. That is more than triple what ESPN was paying. The same sport, the same human beings attempting to render each other unconscious. One version generates $5,000 in broadcast revenue per event. The other generates $25 million per event from the media rights line alone. The variable is audience size. Your job as a promoter is to manufacture, maintain, and grow an audience large enough that platforms compete for access to it. The fighters, the events, the production, all of it is the mechanism for building that audience. The moment you confuse the mechanism for the business, you will make every mistake the people in the next 2 sections made. Robert W. Lee Sr. founded the International Boxing Federation in 1983. The IBF became one of 4 major sanctioning bodies in boxing, organizations whose title belts confer championship status, drive mandatory title fights, and control the pipeline of mandatory challengers. A mandatory challenger is entitled, under the rules, to a title shot. A title shot means a payday, possibly a very large one. According to federal prosecutors, for the next 16 years, Lee sold those rankings. Managers and promoters who wanted their fighters elevated in the IBF's official rankings paid for the privilege. Not as a metaphor. The allegation was systematic bribery that had operated virtually since the IBF's founding. The total amount documented in the indictment, $338,000, approximately $21.00 per year across 16 years to purchase control of boxing's global ranking system for a specific weight class or title. In 1999, Lee was indicted on 33 federal charges: racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion, interstate travel in aid of racketeering. A federal jury deliberated for 15 days. In August 2000, it convicted him on 6 of those 33 counts. In 2001, he was sentenced to 22 months in federal prison and fined $25,000. The per-year math on the bribery is what stays with you. $21, zeros in a year to corrupt the entire mandatory challenger pipeline in professional boxing. The infrastructure wasn't elaborate. It was a man at the top of an organization receiving envelopes in exchange for moving numbers on a spreadsheet for 16 years before a federal investigation caught up. The IBF continues to sanction fights. The title belts that carry its name are still considered legitimate by the boxing press, by broadcasters, and by the commission system you are required to work within. The organization that produced this outcome has not materially restructured. You will pay sanctioning fees into this ecosystem. You will work with rankings generated by organizations that operate without external audits. That is the system as it exists. The second case operates at a different scale and implicates a different failure mode entirely. Daniel Kinahan is the alleged operational head of the Kinahan Organized Crime Group, a transnational criminal organization that the U.S. Treasury Department described as responsible for smuggling narcotics, primarily cocaine, to Europe, and which it characterized as a threat to the entire illicit economy through its role in international money laundering. In 2012, Kinahan co-founded MTK Global, a boxing management company. By 2022, MTK operated in 11 countries and represented dozens of ranked professional fighters at every level of the sport. It was not a fringe entity. It worked with promoters across the United Kingdom, Ireland, and the United States. Its managed fighters competed on major cards that appeared on major broadcast platforms. For a decade, it was a visible, functioning part of the mainstream boxing industry. On April 12, 2022, the United States State Department announced a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to Kinahan's arrest or conviction for participating in transnational organized crime. The U.S. Treasury simultaneously imposed sanctions on the Kinahan Organized Crime Group. MTK Global announced the cessation of its operations within weeks. Every promoter across the UK, Ireland, and the US who had co-promoted with MTK-managed fighters severed ties immediately. Careers built around MTK's roster collapsed as the management infrastructure dissolved. The allegations in subsequent civil and criminal proceedings were specific. Court filings alleged that approximately $1 million in cash moved through a single boxer's bank account, described as laundered proceeds from drug trafficking. A 2025 court complaint alleged Kinahan was paid millions of dollars under the table to serve as a major promoter's exclusive booking agent, an arrangement alleged to have been deliberately concealed. Kinahan was subsequently arrested in Dubai. Here's the point this case makes for you as a would-be promoter. MTK Global was not technically a promotion. It was management. But in combat sports, management and promotion are frequently the same people, the same contracts, and the same money flowing through the same fighters. The fighters are the asset in both structures. The allegation is that the asset was being used as financial infrastructure for a drug cartel, and that the promoters who co-promoted with MTK managed fighters had no idea, for a decade, who they were actually doing business with. You will never know with certainty when you sign a co-promotion agreement or acquire a fighter from another entity whose money built the career you're contracting for. This is not a hypothetical. It is a documented historical incident that shut down an 11-country operation in a matter of weeks. 4 rules that fall directly out of those 2 cases. 1. Never execute a co-promotion or co-management arrangement without independent due diligence on every entity in the chain. MTK operated for 10 years without most of its co-promoters understanding who was behind it. The fights worked. The cards were profitable. The money was good. The money is always good until a State Department press release makes all of it retroactively toxic. 2. Keep fighter compensation above a defensible legal floor. The Levy-Zuffa antitrust case filed in 2014, alleging that the UFC used monopsony power to suppress compensation for elite MMA fighters, settled for $375 million with final court approval granted February 6, 2025. It covered over 100 fighters and events from 2010 to 2017. After attorney fees and administrative costs, the net fighter distribution was $251 million. A second lawsuit, Johnson v. Zuffa, covers 2017 to the present and remains in active litigation. UFC fighters currently receive approximately 16% of the promotion's total revenue. The NBA pays players 50%. The NFL pays players approximately 48%. That differential is not just a moral argument. It is an ongoing legal liability. 3. Understand the sanctioning body's financial structure before you sign any title fight. You are paying for recognition from organizations whose internal governance has been federally prosecuted. Get every fee in writing. Do not build your promotional identity around a title belt granted by an organization you cannot audit. 4. Get your broadcast deal before you build your roster. Without media revenue, you operate a loss-generating live events business. With media revenue, you operate a media company that uses fighters as content. The entire valuation gap between a $500, $0 per year operation and a $690 million promotion is one signed media contract. The single greatest structural threat to this business is not a competitor outbidding you for fighters. It is the fighter pay question, and it is reaching resolution faster than most of the industry is modeling. The UFC's $756 million EBITDA is built on fighters receiving roughly 16 cents of every dollar generated. The Levy-Zuffa settlement cost the UFC less than $54 million per year averaged over the class period, less than 8% of a single year's current EBITDA. Manageable. But the subsequent case covers the present era when revenues are substantially larger, and the legal precedent for fighter pay suppression as an antitrust violation is now established. The MMA market is projected to grow at 12% annually through 2030. Every dollar of new revenue that enters this industry while fighters receive 16% of it is another dollar of potential damages exposure in future litigation. The direction of travel is toward higher fighter pay through litigation, through collective action, or through competing promotions bidding more aggressively for elite talent. If fighter compensation normalizes at 35% of revenue, still below every major team sports league, the UFC's EBITDA falls from $756 million to roughly $370 million. At current valuation multiples, the enterprise value compresses from $11.3 billion to somewhere in the $5 to $6 billion range. For a mid-tier promotion with $100 million in revenue and thin margins, a mandatory 35% fighter pay floor is not a compression event. It is insolvency. You are entering an industry whose cost structure is being litigated in real time. Model accordingly. Time to pull this together and answer the actual question. How much money do you make if you do this right? Scenario 1. You build a regional promotion from zero with $750,000 in starting capital. You run 6 events per year across 2 states, growing your audience through a local streaming arrangement that pays $15,000 per event for broadcast rights. Year 1 revenue, $90. 0 from streaming, $120,000 from gates. Total $210,000. Year 1 costs approximately $1.2 million in total event expenses and overhead. Net, negative $990,000. You require additional capital to survive into year 2. If you raise another $500,000 and reach year 3, your streaming deal, assuming your audience has grown, might increase to $50, 0 per event. Year 3 revenue, $300,000. Year 3 costs, $900,000. Net, still negative $600,000. The regional business only becomes viable when a platform pays you $150,000 to $300,000 per event in broadcast rights fees. That deal does not exist for a promotion with no established audience. You are spending money to build the audience that would justify the deal. This is a pre-financing problem with an uncertain payback date. In most cases, the payback never arrives. Industry tracking of regional promotions across North America found 90% running in fiscal deficit. This is not a selection bias problem. It is the fundamental structure of the economics at this tier. Scenario 2. You acquire a distressed mid-tier promotion for $100 million, structurally similar to PFL's Bellator acquisition in November 2023. You inherit a roster, a brand, and an existing broadcast relationship. PFL's revenue before integrating Bellator was $110 million in 2023. If the combined entity reaches $150 million in stabilized revenue within 3 years at a 25% EBITDA margin, conservative relative to the UFC's 58%, but realistic for a smaller operation, you generate $37. $5 million per year in EBITDA. Against a $100 million acquisition cost, that's a 37.5% cash return and full payback in under 3 years, on paper. In practice, this assumes the broadcast deal renews. It assumes the top 10 fighters on the roster don't defect to the UFC or a Gulf state-backed rival when their contracts expire. It assumes fighter pay litigation doesn't restructure your cost base mid-integration. And it assumes the entity you acquired did not have co-promotion agreements in place with management companies whose principals later appear on a government sanctions list. None of those are small assumptions. PFL itself paid for Bellator entirely in stock, meaning the actual realized value of that $100 million price depends on what PFL's own equity is worth when someone wants to buy the whole thing, which is ultimately a function of future cash flows that have not been generated yet. The UFC was purchased for $2 million in 2001 and is valued at $11.3 billion today. If you had put $2 million into that deal and held, your return would be approximately 500%. Nothing in the history of sports franchise ownership touches that number. The men who paid $2 million were buying a failing asset at its moment of maximum distress, in a sport that most of the industry had declared legally untouchable and commercially unviable. That deal is not available, but its structure is still the template. Somewhere there is a promotion with a broadcast deal and a fighter roster that the current owner no longer wants, for reasons that have nothing to do with the long-term value of the asset. You find that entity before anyone else, and you pay a price that gives you enough runway to wait for the market. Then you avoid the things that put Robert Lee in federal prison for taking $21,000 a year. You avoid the structures that put a $5 million government reward on the head of a man who was simultaneously managing some of the most prominent fighters in the world. Whether the potential return justifies that exposure is not a question with one correct answer. We just do the math. If you want to see that math applied to the other assets nobody in this industry talks about, the licensing bodies, the broadcast infrastructure, the entities that sit above the promotions, subscribe.